J'ai du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire. The
statue of Belgium's King Leopold II has been removed from Antwerp and may not be returned. The statue was burned and hit with red paint during anti-racism protests following George Floyd's death. A growing number of people are now campaigning to remove statues of the colonial-era king. His troops killed and maimed millions of people at rubber plantations in the Congo. And then in London, protesters watched as the statue of Scottish merchant and slave owner Robert Milligan was taken down following a petition for its removal. Milligan was the driving force behind the construction of London's West India docks, which were used to trade slave-harvested goods from the Caribbean. Meantime, in Bristol, demonstrators aren't waiting for monuments to be removed. On Sunday, protesters tore down the statue of a notorious British slave trader and philanthropist. Nick Robertson takes a look at how Britons are now confronting their colonial past.
Britain lurched around a corner confronting the worst of its colonial racist past Sunday as protesters at a Black Lives Matter march in the port city of Bristol toppled a statue of 17th century slave trader Edward Colston, then trundled it through the city's tarmac streets and tossed it into the sea, the same harbour where his slave ships once docked.
It could only have happened that way. It could only have been ripped down. What is that doing up there? It would be like you having somebody that has abused your family all your life. You know who he is. And I get a statue and I put it in your front garden.
Colston and his employer, the Royal Africa Company, dominated the transatlantic slave trade. He helped ship an estimated 100,000 people from Africa to the US and the Caribbean. 1 in 5 of them died along the way. Colston, whose name adorns buildings, streets, even schools in the normally restful city, was also a philanthropist. The controversy over his racist past has been brewing for years.
We politically had tried to go around. We had gone to debates and meetings. We had meetings with the council, meetings with Colston Hall, radio debates, TV debates, and people were, if I can say, pussyfooting around.
Condemnation with caveats came quickly.
I will not support or indulge those who break the law. If you want to change the urban landscape, you can stand for election or vote for someone who will.
Similar long-simmering frustrations over contentious Confederate statues in America are coming to a head too. So is this the moment when the UK, the United States and others recognise the pain of the past, that Black Lives Matter, and reimagine their countries on new values? In the fabled university city of Oxford, that's the pressing question.
Now is the time to change and do things in a different way, rewriting history. And if you have to take a statue from there and put in a museum, so be it.
The statue, Cecil Rhodes, a leading colonialist who built his fortune off black labour and bequeathed scholarships here.
In this country, there is such ingrained sort of systemic racism that hasn't been questioned or looked at or sort of dealt with for far too long.
No sign Oxford plans to grant the protesters their wish, and the conversation about that new future yet to happen too. Nick Robertson, CNN, Oxford, England.
Well, monuments to Cecil John Rhodes have a history of controversy. Back in 2015, his statue was removed from the University of Cape Town after weeks of protest there at UCT. Students had created a Rhodes Must Fall campaign saying his legacy was tainted with racism. Well, let's go to Farai Savenzo. He joins me now from Nairobi, Kenya. He was actually there covering the Rhodes protests back in 2015. And Farai, hi. I just want to get your reaction, and particularly the perspective there from Africa, to all of these protests, which all link back to the death of George Floyd.
Absolutely, Robert. I mean, we had the chairperson of the African Union, Mr. Musa Faki Muhammad, basically saying, look, back in 1964, the African Union, then the Organization of African Unity, was very, very behind the fact that racism in the United States must stop, especially against citizens who are of African descent. And of course, what you're mentioning right now with the whole idea of, the roads must fall, the sculptures going down in Bristol and everything. We are a continent that is completely tainted with, that what Nick was talking about, the pain of the past, which is completely all over the net. Why should we have Cecil John Rhodes statues all over Cape Town? And why should we have him buried in Zimbabwe, a country that's completely turned against the idea of not having any land? So it's a live issue, Robin. It's been going on for quite a while. And of course, even in Bristol, Mr. Colston, whose statue was thrown in the river, my daughter went to the Colston Girls' School, and she told me yesterday, she feels free when that statue fell in the water. So it's a live issue, and it needs to be addressed.
Farai Savenzo, thanks so much for joining us there live from Nairobi. Thanks, Farai. So Banksy has a suggestion for replacing the toppled statue we just mentioned of that slave trader Edward Colston. In a sketch posted on Instagram, the elusive street artist illustrates the moment demonstrators removed the statue in Bristol. And in the caption, Banksy says, here's an idea that caters for both those who miss the Colston statue and those who don't. He then suggests pulling it from the water, tying rope around its neck and commissioning life-size bronze figures of the protesters who pulled it down. Well, Banksy has publicly expressed support for the Black Lives Matter movement, sharing another post on Sunday with a painting of a vigil candle burning an American flag, writing, "People of color are being failed by the system."
It is Wednesday, the 10th of June of 2020. And you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests? Yes! And how meddlesome are they? Well, they work for the Catholic Worker. They're 75 years old, and they are Antifa operatives. It's odd because police chiefs and investigators and prosecutors and all the people that they've arrested, they can't find Antifa. That's how insidious Antifa is. You look for them, and you know they're there, but they just cannot be found. How is that? In my little town, people are still up in arms, and I'm not kidding. When I say up in arms, they got 50 calibers, and they're not afraid to show it. And they're going to use them against the busloads of 75-year-old Antifa soldiers coming here to take our ranch dressing white sauce from our pizzas. We can't have that. Our white sauce is the last white thing we have left. Man, these people, between spikes in coronavirus, which is happening, and we'll go through that in the weather report. Yeah, the virus is now part of the weather. At least the reportage of it. Anyway, we have spikes, and these people are still out there calling Kate Brown, our Democratic governor, the Gestapo. Yeah, the people who want to keep you healthy are the Gestapo, and the people who want to kill you are doing God's work. Yeah, I bet they are. All right, I keep telling you, the Trump administration's plans are nothing but a cookbook, and you are on the menu. And I only mention this because Fauci did come out and warn people, masks and social distancing, we better keep doing it because this thing's not over and it's going to start blowing up. And you know what it is. But if you go to the small towns like I live in and you read the community pages, say on Facebook, and it's the WHO and Dr. Fauci are the most corrupt people in the world. And no mention of how corrupt Donald Trump is because he's been perfect. And when you bring up even the $25 million fine he recently paid for his Trump University fraud, they don't believe you. You bring up paying the largest fine in HUD history and housing discrimination in 1978, they don't believe you. It's all a liberal conspiracy. And then they tell me that I'm an idiot and I'm a loser and I don't want to see the truth that busloads of Antifa, 75-year-old Antifa soldiers are coming here to Rogue River, Oregon to kill us in our sleep. Man, I keep telling them, stop watching that local Sinclair channel. There's 2 of them. Right in Medford, 2. How is that possible? Well, it is. And the Black Lives Matter movement is a target and a foil for comedy among these bigots. A fellow wanted to know if it was okay to go to the city park that has Evans Creek right there. And he wanted to know if it was what other people thought about him going there on his own and just ripping out the blackberry bushes along the embankment. What? Have you ever lived along a creek before? How about a river? You're going to take plant material that has webs of roots holding up an embankment and take that away so water can erode it away? That's called repairing erosion, by the way. Now, there were some cooler heads who said, maybe you should contact the city first. They only wanted to clear out enough so there would be, a little sandy beach. So, more of a sandy beach for people to sit on and enjoy the creek. Not knowing they could have a landslide coming down them and burying them before the water washes that dirt away that has buried them. I don't know, people. But of course, because someone brought that up and he was going to do it outside of, city regulations, some joker brought up Black Lives Matter. Oh, well, U.S. society is trying to defund the police and security services. Just do it. Just do it. Just do it. In fact, really, instead of cutting, spraying is better in October. Spraying? When these people ever stop? And, of course, I made mention that, hey, we're not defunding the police because, it's the way to get rid of the police. No, first of all, it's not really defunding, whatever that means. It means not paying them the number one item on the local budgets. How about that? Anyway, it's not defunding the police. We're talking about police reform because of systemic racism and to use Black Lives Matter as a foil, as a comparable to somebody outside the law ripping out blackberry bushes, holding up an embankment along a creek. That is being a smartass. Well, I'm sure I'll be muted for calling the guy a smartass. But they can go ahead and be bigots with impunity. And they have been. Though I will say, the quiet people, the silent majority, has been speaking up. And I believe now the deplorables see what is arrayed against them. Their voices have given them an outsized sense of power because they're just loud and they're bullies. But the silent majority, the terrible sleeping giant, has been awakened. And the deplorables now see the error of their ways. And how do they react? By doubling down, tripling down. They're not going to be less bigoted. They're not going to be more affirmative towards social distancing to protect other people. No, they're going to put it in our faces and spit on us. Virus spit. just to kick the libs. Well, I hate to say this. You go to a Trump rally, I think you're in much more danger than a Black Lives Matter rally. Because at least at Black Lives Matter rallies, they wear masks. At least. What's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Well, at the top, that was actually showing how Black Lives Matter and its movement has pressed the world to confront its racist colonial history and the statues commemorating that past. And those statues are coming down. On the rest of the menu, as the pandemic spikes anew, the chief health officer for Orange County, California, has resigned after receiving numerous credible death threats. Not just to her, but her family, too. And not just her immediate family, but mom and dad and grandma and grandpa. Well, it's Orange County. What do you expect? States that rush to reopen against expert advice are reporting record high numbers of virus cases. Oh, well, I would say at least the ones that are reporting it. And Black Lives Matter sued the Seattle Police Department over its violent tactics. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the arrest of Mexican labor activist Susana Preito has raised concerns for worker rights. And U.S. aircraft intercepted 4 Russian nuclear-capable bombers near Alaska. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the rightish of the page is our chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the leftish of the chat room link that just happens to be at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will then notice our link to our Patreon page. And though times are tough, we are in great need to pay our bills. Though the bulk of how we pay this comes out of our own wallets, we would be unable to do this without you. And your generosity over all these many years, almost 10, by the way, yeah. 10 years of continuous 24/7, 365 broadcasting. Resistance Radio, that's what we do. We had a mandate, and we're living up to it. So that stated, if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink sent our way, the money, please, we would be able to mitigate the rising costs of our bills, darn them. And, of course, need to get some software for the newish machinery we have on order. And thank you for helping us amass the funds. It's taken us a little bit, but this little Dell that's been running for over 4 years now, on Windows 7. That's how ancient it is. A lot of the software will no longer be workable in just a matter of months. So thank you for your generosity in allowing us to continue this Resistance Radio as the founders originally intended. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. And we thank Tom for doing so. And he and Kelly do so much more, of course. I take care of at Justice Putnam, and I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime, and then get that posted up on social media. And I heard Twitter is social media, part of it at least. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Don't look for podcasts on etc. They're not there. Okay, let's dive into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. And it comes from anonymous worker bees at the Associated Press. The health officer for Southern California's Orange County has resigned after receiving threats. Those are death threats, by the way, over her order for residents to wear face coverings when near others in public to protect against coronavirus. And they want her dead because she's a Gestapo. Dr. Nicole Quick resigned unexpectedly on Monday from a job where she worked 80-hour weeks and faced threats at public meetings and on social media, said Frank Kim, the county's executive officer. He said she had been provided security. And I keep hearing from, like my Trump bro, for instance, how Antifa is going to come and kill him. I don't know where he's getting these death threats, because Antifa, first of all, isn't organized enough to be able to do anything like that. Second of all, it doesn't make any sense. No one ever goes and exacts punishment on a right-winger. The right-wingers come out and, do it before anybody else can. They're forward thinkers. It's a very stressful position, Kim told reporters. There have been multiple staff that have received threats, and each one of those is reviewed by law enforcement. We take them very seriously. A message left for Quick was not immediately returned because I don't think she's listening to her death threat phone message machine. I don't think she's opening up social media. Quick is the seventh, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, senior health official to resign in California since the pandemic began, and all of them received death threats, and not one came from Antifa. Health officials have been facing unprecedented pressure, criticism, and threats, said Kat DeBerg, executive director of the Health Officers Association of California. In addition to the California public health officials who have resigned, one was given a sheriff's escort to provide security, DeBerg said. We certainly have had angry comments at meetings before, especially around vaccines. But this level of threat of having to have a sheriff's escort, we have not seen that before. Cy Martin of the American Independent brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Since the beginning of June, 11 states that opted to reopen their economies early against expert advice have reported record high numbers of confirmed coronavirus cases. The Washington Post reported on Monday that Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, Kentucky, Mississippi, New Mexico, North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, and Utah had all recently experienced their highest 7-day average numbers of new cases since the pandemic began. On June 1st, by which time all of those states had reopened their economies, none of them met all 5 federal criteria for doing so, according to an analysis by ProPublica. The Post reported that 3 additional states, California, my state of Oregon, and Tennessee, also saw record high case numbers, but those states had not reopened businesses statewide. But I should mention that in Oregon, we had an insurrection of Trump brats going out, meeting up, and getting infected. Yeah, we didn't open up our economies, but the GOP didn't care about the safety of their fellows or their gals. The number of cases spiked so high in Arizona that Dr. Kara Christ, director of the state's Department of Health Services, urged hospitals to fully activate emergency plans on Saturday. A day later, Banner Health, Arizona's largest health system, announced it had reached capacity for their ventilator machines. Some health experts speculated that Governor Doug Ducey's decision to end stay-at-home orders on May 15th may have helped spread the coronavirus. The Arizona Republic reported, Arizona Republic reported on Monday, on June 1st, Arizona had 20,123 confirmed coronavirus cases and at least 917 people had died. On Tuesday, yesterday, the state had more than 27,000 confirmed cases, and at least 1,052 people had died. And that was according to the New York Times. Last week, Florida saw a string of 5 consecutive days on which the number of new cases topped 1,000, and health officials are worried that the number could continue to rise, and that's on top of the numbers being suppressed in Florida. On June 1st, Florida had 56,830 confirmed cases and at least 2,460 deaths. By Tuesday, yesterday, it had nearly 65,000 confirmed cases and at least 2,711 people had died. In addition to the new high number of cases, Texas saw a new high number of patients, nearly 2,000 admitted to hospitals with coronavirus on Monday alone. The new numbers were announced on the same day Greg Abbott announced restaurants, bars, and other businesses in the state could increase capacity to 50%. Many businesses in the state reopened on May 1st. On May 31st, Texas had 64,729 confirmed cases, and at least 1,675 people had died. Tuesday, yesterday, it had more than 77,000 confirmed cases, and at least 1,856 people had died. Many states rushed to let businesses reopen in May as layoff and unemployment numbers rose, and Trump encouraged the states to get back to normal because his stock portfolio was crashing. As some states followed the advice of experts and exercised more caution in reopening, Trump made his opinions clear. "Reopen our country," he tweeted on May 18th. On May 12th, Dr. Anthony Fauci had cautioned states against reopening too quickly in testimony before the U.S. Senate. Fauci warned that the consequences could be really serious if cities, states, or what have you jump over those various checkpoints and prematurely open up, predicting that the nation could start to see a little spike here and there that will turn into outbreaks. On the night before his testimony, Fauci emailed a New York Times reporter saying he feared reopening economies too soon may not only result in needless suffering and death, but would actually set us back on our quest to return to normal. You know, like a normal economy. Despite cautions from experts and spikes in cases in many states, some governors are moving ahead and reopening still more businesses in states. "We need to reopen," South Carolina's Republican Governor Harry McMaster told business leaders last Friday. "We need to be sure to let people know that the virus is still here, but you can't restrict business because business is God." Across the country, over 2 million people have confirmed case of coronavirus, and at least 110,966 people have died. of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A Black Lives Matter group sued the Seattle Police Department on Tuesday yesterday to halt the violent tactics it has used to break up largely peaceful protests in recent days. The ACLU of Washington, the Korematsu Center at Seattle University School of Law, and the law firm Perkins Coie filed the complaint in U.S. District Court on behalf of Black Lives Matter Seattle King County. These daily demonstrations are fueled by people from all over the city who demand that police stop using excessive force against black people. And they demand that Seattle dismantle its racist system of oppression. And of course the cops don't like that. So of course they're going to fight back. Livio de la Cruz, board member of Black Lives Matter, Seattle King County, said in a written statement, except for my little editorializing. That was me. It is unacceptable, Livio said, that the police department would then respond to these demonstrations with more excessive force, including using tear gas and flashbang grenades. Well, I told you, they don't want systemic racism ended. That's their reason to tet. It is. Officers have used tear gas, pepper spray, and other, I hate this term, less than lethal? Less than lethal? Just maim you for life. That's okay. Against crowds that have demonstrated against racism and police brutality following the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin and Police Chief Carmen Best have apologized to peaceful protesters who were subjected to chemical weapons. But even after they promised a 30-day ban on using CS gas, last Friday, officers used it again 2 nights later, saying unruly demonstrators were encroaching on their positions. All I can say is that if these cops can't handle half-full bottles of plastic water bottles thrown at them, don't ever play an opening set for Third Eye Blind. My God! You get the full bottles thrown at you then. I know. Under pressure from city councilors, protesters, and dozens of other elected leaders who have demanded that officers dial back their tactics, the police department on Monday removed barricades nearest East Precinct building in the Capitol Hill neighborhood where protesters and riot squads had faced off nightly. Protesters were allowed to march and demonstrate in front of the building, and the night remained peaceful, which makes you think the cops are the ones bringing the violence, because they are. Last evening, Tuesday, with hundreds of people gathered in the rain on Capitol Hill, there was no violence and no officers. The lawsuit alleged that the use of chemical agents and less lethal projectiles police had violated the Fourth Amendment's protection against excessive force as well as the First Amendment's free speech protections. It also said the use of tear gas and pepper spray was especially reckless during a respiratory pandemic. Well, that was a feature, not a bug, and could increase risks related to COVID-19. Like I said, a feature, not a bug. On an almost nightly basis, the Seattle Police Department has indiscriminately used excessive force against protesters, legal observers, journalists, and medical personnel, the lawsuit states. The police department referred questions about the case to the Seattle City Attorney's Office, which said only that it is reviewing it. That brings us to our break, and we better get on with our break. So when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
The
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, a love letter to TV and radio. Director Andrew Patterson's debut, The Vast of Night, harkens back to an earlier era. Designed to look like an episode of the cult classic The Twilight Zone, complete with a Rod Serling sound-alike. Even more so, it's a nod to the medium that preceded TV, radio, in the era when it was truly the lifeblood of the community, especially in small towns. Set in 1950s New Mexico, in a fictional place that's hinted to be not far from top-secret government goings-on, the movie tells the story of two high schoolers, Everett, a local radio announcer operator, as they used to be called, and Faye, a junior telephone switchboard operator. She begins hearing a strange noise that is interfering with both the radio broadcasts and telephone calls. Everett, seeking explanations from listeners, airs a caller who mentions that he had heard that sound years before and suggests that it involves a government project out in the desert. Anyone with the vaguest notion of pop culture will quickly pick up on where this one is headed, despite its modest budget, much of which is saved for an impressive visual grand finale. While the plot isn't very original, the way that it is shot and presented is refreshing. Simply put, Patterson makes the most of what he has. With no star actors, he manages to make something as seemingly mundane as radio interference to build an atmosphere of suspense and intrigue. The key here is moderation. Even the nods to the 50s, like the hairdos, the cat's eyeglasses, and tail-fin cards, are subtle enough to work without ever feeling over the top. The Vast of Night is a wonderful debut that could well be a surprise hit in the COVID summer movie season. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. The Dead Sea Scrolls are religious manuscripts. They were written from the 3rd century BCE to the 1st century CE. They were discovered in the 1940s and 50s in caves along the shore of the Dead Sea. And the parchments have been the topic of intense religious, literary, and historical debate. And they also continue to be the subject of scientific analysis, including DNA.
The idea was to try to match and also piece apart fragments based on their genetic identity, namely based on the animals from which they were made.
Oded Rehavi is a molecular biologist at Tel Aviv University. His team sequenced the DNA from bits of scroll dust.
Almost all the scrolls that we sampled were perhaps surprisingly found to be made out of sheep skin. We found 2 that were made out of cow skin, and that's a big story.
Here, Rehavi's colleague Noam Mizrahi from the university's Department of Biblical Studies picked up the story. The scrolls, he says, came from a place called Qumran, a 3 days' walk from the cultural center of Jerusalem. Mizrahi explains that the people of Qumran were an extremist group with apocalyptic predictions who harshly criticized the views of others. Therefore, he says, there's been long-standing debate about how much the scrolls, unearthed from this sect in Qumran, represented just this faction's views or more general Jewish thought at the time. Now, the presence of cow skins in a desert region inhospitable to cattle is provocative because it suggests this.
That cow-made scrolls do not reflect the sectarian community of Qumran, but were rather brought from the outside, written at the outside, and hence reflect the broader Jewish society of the period.
That finding is in the journal Cell. Several other lines of evidence point to the ancient Qumran library containing a broad diversity of texts. Mizrahi says genetics have added a new dimension to his studies, complementing his analysis of the content and language of the parchments.
Here, I discovered that the material of the scrolls, the very biological material from which the scrolls are made, is as informative and as telling in terms of the very questions that I was trying to clarify for myself and for other scholars.
In other words, sometimes you need the subtext. In this case, literally the material under the writing. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. In his farewell address, George Washington warned against the dangers of party and faction. He believed in the virtues of nonpartisan government, in which patriotic citizens of different views would be willing to serve together. George Washington's great stature as a national hero and his willingness to serve for 2 terms bridged strong regional differences and gave the new government time to take root before party factions could become divisive. At the same time, however, Washington's belief in a strong executive and his nationalist sentiments inclined him to favor Alexander Hamilton's policies over Thomas Jefferson's. Washington's warnings against party and faction to the contrary, he was in many respects the country's first Federalist president. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1946. That was the day that the U.S. Supreme Court handed down a decision that would have massive implications for American workers. The case was known as Anderson v. Mount Clemens Pottery. The pottery company was operated on a large 8-acre property in Mount Clemens, Michigan. Each day, the workers punched into their shifts and then had to make their way to their workstations. There they had to get ready to work, perhaps donning gloves, sharpening tools, or readying their workstations. The company estimated that these tasks took 14 minutes. So they subtracted 14 minutes from the workers' timesheets each day. 7 workers had had enough and decided to sue the company with backing from their union. They argued that they should be compensated for their entire time, including the time it took to prepare for work. The Supreme Court agreed with the workers. Justice Frank Murphy wrote the decision for the court. He himself was from Michigan and had previously been the mayor of Detroit and the governor of the state. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court case was not the last word on the matter. In 1994, the State Bar of Michigan and the Macomb County Bar Association helped erect a historic marker commemorating this important case. It described what happened after Justice Murphy's determination. Quote, the following year, Congress, responding to the Mount Clemens Pottery decision, enacted the Portal to Portal Act to relieve employers of the obligation to pay for time spent in non-productive activities, except where such activities are compensable through custom or contract, notably through collective bargaining. In other words, Congress passed a law undermining the court's protection of workers. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
I read the news today, oh boy.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
Georgia, Nevada, South Carolina, and West Virginia held primary elections on Tuesday. There were so many voting issues in Georgia that state officials are now calling for investigations. Voters waited in line for hours. Some precincts extended voting well into the night. Election officials blamed the delays on technical issues and a shortage of poll workers due to the pandemic. The state election board is already investigating the handling of absentee ballots in Atlanta's Fulton County. Of major concern now is the idea that these issues could be an ominous preview of what could happen in November's general election. Nevada also experienced widespread problems at the polls. Some voters were waiting in line for 3 hours or more at limited polling places in Las Vegas, despite Nevada officials encouraging people to vote by mail due to the coronavirus. Meanwhile, groups across the country are reporting growing voter registration numbers amid recent surges of activism. Other voter-oriented groups are seeing a rise in volunteer support and donations. Family, friends, and dignitaries gathered in Houston on Tuesday for the funeral of George Floyd, the unarmed black man killed in Minneapolis police custody 2 weeks ago. People who grew up with Floyd in Houston were in attendance, as were relatives of Eric Garner, a New York man who died in a police chokehold, and those of Ahmaud Arbery, a 25-year-old Georgia man fatally shot in February while jogging. Civil rights leader Reverend Al Sharpton delivered a eulogy, saying Floyd's death, quote, was not just a tragedy, it was a crime. And he pointed a finger at wickedness in high places.
You're sitting now trying to figure out how you're going to stop the protest rather than how you're going to stop the brutality. You're calling your cabinet in trying to figure out how it's going to affect your vote rather than how it's going to affect our lives. You're scheming on how you can spin the story rather than you can achieve justice, wickedness in high places. You take rubber bullets and tear gas to clear out peaceful protesters, and then take a Bible and walk in front of a church and use a church as a prop. Wickedness in high places. You ain't been walking across that street when the church didn't have the boards up. You wasn't holding up no Bible when Arbery was killed in Brunswick, when Taylor was killed in Louisville. Wickedness in high places.
Presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden appeared via video a day after meeting with the Floyd family in person in Houston.
Now is the time for racial justice. That's the answer we must give to our children when they ask why. Because when there is justice for George Floyd, we will truly be on our way to racial justice in America. And then, as you said, Gianna, your daddy will have changed the world.
Senate Republicans are now working on legislation to address police reform, one of many nationwide changes mobilized by ongoing protests over racism and police brutality. A task force led by the Senate's only black Republican member, Tim Scott of South Carolina, sent Republican offices a draft of a proposed Justice Act focused on issues of reporting, accountability, training, and community relations. This is a big turnaround for the Senate, which not long ago was dismissive of acting on the issue. Democrats already unveiled their own proposal, which goes further in dictating specific changes, including banning chokeholds. Officials in states, including New York, Florida, and California, already have moved to ban the use of neck restraints by police. In COVID news, at least 28 states are not following CDC guidelines for coronavirus reporting, which could make it more difficult for health experts and lawmakers to decide what to do next. The states are not reporting probable cases, which include people who show evidence of an infection without the confirmation of a lab test. Accurate rates of new cases help officials track how the disease is spreading and inform decisions about how and when to loosen restrictions. These shoddy reporting numbers come as 19 states are seeing increases in their coronavirus cases. In Arizona, things have gotten so bad again that the state has told its hospitals to activate emergency plans. More than 1.9 million people have been infected by the virus in the U.S., and more than 112,000 have already died. So it's been over a month since Donald Trump suggested ingesting disinfectant to fight COVID-19 and subsequently ended the circus of his daily briefings due to the backlash. The nation's top infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, has been virtually silenced ever since. But he emerged on Tuesday for an interview with CNBC in which he proclaimed the ongoing pandemic is far from over.
Now we have something that indeed turned out to be my worst nightmare, something that's highly transmissible in a period, if you just think about it, in a period of 4 months, it has devastated the world, and it isn't over yet.
He continued asking, where is it going to end? We're still at the beginning of really understanding, and added that in just 4 months, the virus has, quote, devastated the whole world. And finally, yesterday I told you about the Brevard County, Florida police union president who sent a Facebook post inviting cops accused of misconduct in other cities to apply for jobs in Florida. Well, thankfully he's been suspended. Brevard County Sheriff Wayne Ivey said that Bert Gaiman, a lieutenant at the agency and president of the Brevard County Fraternal Order of Police, was suspended with pay while an internal investigation is conducted. Ivey called the posts disgusting. Why with pay? That's a vacation. Just saying. And that's just a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com, and please click on that donate button.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 60 degrees Fahrenheit, expected to be a bit warmer than yesterday. We topped out around 80-ish, and we should be in the mid-80s today. Overnight lows will be in the upper 50s to low 60s, and let's see, mostly sunny, and winds will be out of the west at 5 to 10 miles per hour in about an hour or so. Tonight, overnight lows should be, as I mentioned, in the upper 50s, low 60s, partly to mostly cloudy overnight. Winds will shift out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And then tomorrow, considerable cloudiness with highs near the low 80s. Winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Confirmed coronavirus cases in Jackson County of Southern Oregon stands at 71 from yesterday, a jump. We had a jump from over the weekend and have been holding steady, and then we jumped from 69 to 71 in Jackson County. No reports of deaths, but I think that's because there aren't testing for it. Grass pollen right outside the window of the mothership is rated very high. The air quality index in the Southern Oregon region is good at 23 parts per million. And the daytime UV index is very high at 9. So slather on the highest SPF that you can find, maybe 50. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.13 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles. And relative humidity is at 93%. Oh, a lot. Rather humid, almost tropical, like we're in Hawaii. Sometimes it feels like that because we are, in the same sort of longitude there. Indeed. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 56 with rain and coronavirus. Paris is 70 degrees and sunny with coronavirus. Rome is 75 and mostly cloudy with coronavirus. Kyiv is 90 degrees and fair with coronavirus. Kabul is 77 and fair with coronavirus. Hong Kong is 81 degrees, partly cloudy with coronavirus. Tokyo is 77 and mostly cloudy with coronavirus. Sydney, Australia is 61 degrees and mostly cloudy with coronavirus. San Francisco, California is 58 degrees, partly cloudy with a spike in coronavirus. And New York is 77 degrees Fahrenheit, sunny, continuing with coronavirus, coupled with civil unrest. Sorely needed unrest, we might add. And that is weather from around the world. Brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property. And these people positively live around the world. Dana Beth Solomon of Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Labor rights advocates in Mexico called for the release of activist Susana Preito after her arrest on a charge of threatening public officials, raising questions about worker protections ahead of a new North American trade deal. Prieto, a labor lawyer, organized strikes last year at several dozen manufacturers in the northern border city of Matamoros in Tamaulipas State, urging better wages. A central aim of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, which will take effect on the 1st of July, is to improve labor rights and union independence in Mexico. In recent weeks, Prieto, who has criticized traditional union leadership, has led protests at factories that she is accused of not taking proper measures to protect workers from the coronavirus. The prosecutor's office said that the arrest was on charges of inciting riot, threats, and coercion against public officials.
Je te donne, c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Anonymous worker bees at Reuters bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. U.S. fighter jets intercepted and escorted 4 Russian nuclear-capable bombers during a routine flight over neutral waters near the U.S. Russia said the 11-hour flight, carried out by 2 of its Tupolev Tu-95MS bombers, complied with international law, and that U.S. F-22 Raptor tactical fighters had accompanied its planes during some stages of their flight. Sounds like some saber rattling and letting Trump know who's the boss, and that Trump's a little late on paying that vig that he owes Vlad. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. And you do know Netroots Radio will broadcast on. And we'll meet up tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre. de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Sous la pluie d'un novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.